The year is 1918, and in Oklahoma, 35 Mvskoke citizens would meet at Hickory Stomp Ground to discuss the formation of a community veterans group. Hyperbolic media coverage, paranoia, and racist Native American stereotypes would coalesce to dub this event the Creek Draft Rebellion. This video is based on the research presented by Thomas A. Britton in the article The Creek Draft Rebellion of 1918, Wartime Hysteria and Indian Baiting in World War I Oklahoma. This information is being presented with the permission of the author and the Oklahoma Historical Society. A link to the original article will be provided in the description of this video. The Grand Army of the Republic was a fraternal organization formed by Civil War veterans who had served the Union Army in 1866. The GAR was organized by state-level departments and community-level posts. Its members wore military-style uniforms. In the 1880s, the GAR began advocating for Union veterans to receive federal pensions. It was at its peak in 1890 with 408,487 members. Between 1872 and 1904, the GAR was a very powerful political force. During the first week of June 1918, 35 Mvskoke men, women, and children, as well as a number of freedmen descendants, met at Hickory Stomp Ground south of Henrietta, Oklahoma, to discuss the formation of a Grand Army of the Republic post. This June meeting was led by 40-year-old Ellen Perryman, daughter of Wright Perryman. Ellen had petitioned the federal government to receive her deceased father's pension, claiming that he had served in the Union Army during the Civil War. She had organized the meeting to discuss the formation of a GAR post to honor Mvskoke citizens who were loyal to the Union during the war. The location for the meeting, Hickory Stomp Ground, had been a focal point for Chitto Harjo's resistance to allotment and cultural assimilation from 1900 to 1909. During the meeting, those in attendance began to discuss their dissatisfaction with Woodrow Wilson and his administration's insistence that all eligible men register for the draft. Word of the anti-government sentiment reached an unidentified group of citizens from Mvskoke County, who arrived at the stomp ground later that evening and broke up the gathering with gunfire and threats. This incident would be reported in the Daily Oklahoman with the headline, 200 Creeks Go on Warpath Over Drafting of Youths, 3 Whites Rumored Killed. Newspapers across the nation ran stories of rumors that 2 to 3 white farmers had been murdered by a large force of armed Creek warriors that then retreated into the hill country surrounding Henrietta. These articles reached the hands of Cato Sells, a commissioner for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and on June 10th he instructed Gabe Parker, superintendent of the 5 civilized tribes, to launch an investigation into the Stomp Ground meeting. Parker replied a day later that the media articles were exaggerations and that Ellen Perryman was, quote, apparently demented, end quote, and her statements at the meeting disconnected, visionary, and irresponsible. Parker was ordered to continue the investigation. BIA Field Clerk Harry B. Siddicum was sent to Henrietta to conduct a more thorough investigation. Siddicum interviewed local law enforcement and National Guard officials who had taken a detachment of troops to the stomp ground the night after the meeting. These witnesses claimed Perryman was, quote, hostile towards the U.S. government, end quote, and spoke disrespectfully towards the American flag. These interviews led to little new information, so Superintendent Parker advised Siddicum to interview several full-blood Mvskoke citizens to find out who had attended the meeting and what they had talked about. Parker was particularly interested in who had broken up the meeting and if the Mvskoke citizens who attended had been prevented from lawfully assembling. While Siddicum was investigating for Parker, BIA Commissioner Sells had become dissatisfied with the results. On June 22nd, Sells ordered H.B. Pierce, the superintendent of the Haskell Indian Institute in Kansas, to head to Oklahoma to conduct a parallel investigation. Pierce met with Parker and toured the Hickory Stomp Ground, concluding that there was no danger of any uprising. Pierce's report to Sells described the Mvskoke as quiet, peaceful, and as far as I could tell, entirely loyal, unless it be in the case of Ellen Perryman. These investigations were predicated on newspaper reports, and Jack Carter had been the reporter to break the initial story. After publishing the initial reports, Carter had sworn in an affidavit that he had interviewed Perryman shortly after the meeting, and she had reiterated her claims against Wilson and the American Army. Carter claimed that Perryman had met with Philip Enos in Washington, D.C. According to Carter, Enos was the leader of an organization trying to reclaim Native American lands with the protection of an enemy government. If true, Carter's claims would seem to bolster his earlier reporting, but his reputation in journalistic circles was called into question. Jerry Rand, the editor of the Mvskoke Phoenix at the time, referred to Carter as, quote, very unreliable in his manner of reporting news, end quote. After the Creek Rebellion story broke, according to Rand, he advised Mr. Carter that he had no further use for his services. Peers also called Carter's affidavit into question, pointing out that it reaffirmed Carter's sensational newspaper reports. 2 months after the meeting at Hickory Stomp Ground, on August 8th, W.L. Reed met with Perryman at Council Hill, Oklahoma. Reed was an investigator that had been hired by James C. Davis, the national attorney for the Mvskoke Creek Nation. After speaking with Perryman, Reed had concluded that she was working with a small number of Mvskoke veterans who were trying to get compensation from the federal government for claims originating during the Civil War. Reed characterized Perryman as, quote, undoubtedly demented, end quote, but perfectly harmless. According to Reed's report, Perryman feared there was a $2,000 bounty on her head, and she refused to meet with anyone without an armed escort. Davis, after receiving the report, recommended that the matter be dropped. In September, Department of Justice officials came into possession of letters written and signed by Perryman and other Mvskoke full-bloods that recommended Mvskoke citizens against registering for the draft. This resulted in warrants being issued for their arrest. September 10th, federal investigators and United States Marshals, as well as a dozen local law enforcement officials, headed to Hickory Stomp Ground. Rumors had spread that Mvskoke citizens, led by Perryman, were organizing an uprising and planned to burn houses, barns, and turn out livestock. When the group arrived, they found no evidence of an uprising, and Perryman could not be located at the grounds. Later in September, a BIA field clerk reported rumors that Perryman and some accomplices had been meeting in Washington, D.C. with a representative of the German government. According to the rumors, the German government had promised that Mvskoke citizens that refrained from participating in the war would get special treatment from Germany after it won the war. In October, these reports were referred to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Secret Service. The United States Postal Service notified the Secret Service that Perryman and several Mvskoke full-bloods had been sending letters containing money to unknown parties located at 468 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. Government officials continued to search both Oklahoma and Washington, D.C. for Perryman, until U.S. Marshals finally caught up with her in Mvskoke and arrested her for violation of the Espionage Act. December 18th, a hearing was held in Mvskoke to determine what to do with Perryman. In attendance was a representative of the U.S. Attorney's Office, a deputy U.S. Marshal, MCN National Attorney James C. Davis, as well as a representative from Gabe Parker's office, and, of course, Ellen Perryman. All participants agreed to postpone the case indefinitely and release Perryman, with the understanding that she keep quiet and behave herself. Ellen Perryman married a Chickasaw man named Edmund Colbert in 1922. They had a daughter, Mary Colbert Gooden, who resided in the Mvskoke Creek Nation capital city of Okmulgee until her death in 2013.